I can still hear it when I close my eyes. The garbled echo of SpongeBob's laugh, distorted into something that didn't sound like it belonged to anything alive. It wasn't cheerful. It wasn't even remotely funny. It was this underwater shriek, stretching far too long, layered with something else beneath it. I swear, beneath the static, there were children crying. The screen was flickering with washed-out colors, SpongeBob standing in the middle of what looked like an abandoned, waterlogged version of Bikini Bottom. The buildings sagged and warped like they'd been underwater for centuries, though of course, they always were. Still, it looked wrong. And SpongeBob just stared at me through the glass of the TV screen, his eyes bigger than usual, bloodshot, unblinking. I should have turned it off right there. I should have yanked the tape out and burned it. But I couldn't. Something about the way the static rolled over his face, the way his body twitched in half-animated frames, made me feel like the tape wasn't just showing me something. It was trying to speak to me. And here I am, telling you about it when every part of me knows I shouldn't be. If this video cuts off halfway through, if my account suddenly goes dark, you'll understand why. Just remember that I warned you. Because I know how this sounds. But the second I saw it, I realized this wasn't a regular episode. This wasn't some fan-made parody. What I saw was never meant to air. At one point, SpongeBob opened his mouth, too wide, so wide his jaw unhinged like a snake's, and the static screamed along with him. For a second, the whole screen went black except for one thing. Text flashing in pale yellow letters, jagged and uneven. I only caught it for half a second, but it said, "You weren't supposed to see this." That's the part that keeps me up at night. Not the crying, not the warped laughter, not even the feeling that SpongeBob's eyes followed me when I looked away from the screen. No, it was that message. Because it wasn't part of a show. It was meant for me. I don't know if I should even be sharing this, but I also know if I keep it to myself, it'll eat me alive. So I'm going to tell you everything. How I found it, why I watched it, and what happened after. Maybe you'll believe me. Maybe you won't. But once you hear the whole story, you'll understand why I wish to God I'd never found that tape in the first place. Because it all started so innocently. Just a regular day, a thrift store, a box of old VHS tapes, and one without a label. If you grew up in the early 2000s, you probably know the feeling of Saturday mornings. The kind where you'd pour a bowl of sugar-loaded cereal and let Nickelodeon do the babysitting. For me, SpongeBob wasn't just a cartoon. It was comfort. It was something safe, something bright and stupidly cheerful that made everything else fade into the background. So yeah, maybe it sounds pathetic, but as an adult, I started chasing that same feeling again. Nostalgia's a hell of a drug. That's how I ended up sifting through dusty bins and thrift shops, digging through old VHS collections like some treasure hunter of forgotten cartoons. Most people my age scroll through streaming services. Me? I wanted the real thing. Plastic clamshell cases, faded covers, the little squeak when you push the tape into the VCR. There's something about it that makes the memory feel more authentic. On that particular day, the shop wasn't anything special. It smelled like old carpet and faint cigarette smoke, the kind of place where you expect to find decades of junk nobody wants. Boxes of porcelain cats, outdated kitchen appliances, stacks of VHS tapes lined up like lost soldiers. I was half-humming the SpongeBob theme under my breath as I crouched down to flip through them. Titles scrawled in marker, worn covers of Disney movies, taped over sitcoms with commercials still intact. The kind of stuff nobody, but people like me, even bothered touching anymore. I remember joking with myself as I pulled out a worn copy of SpongeBob, Nautical Nonsense and Sponge Buddies. Man, I must have watched this tape 100 times. I almost bought it just for old time's sake, but I figured I already had one at home. My collection wasn't complete, but it was respectable. Dozens of tapes stacked neatly, each one its own little time capsule. The thing about nostalgia, though, is that it makes you greedy. It's never enough to have most of it. You start chasing the gaps, the missing episodes, the variations you swear you saw once as a kid but can't find anymore. That's the itch I was trying to scratch. And then, I saw it. Buried near the bottom of a cracked plastic crate was a black VHS tape. No sleeve, no title, not even a piece of masking tape with handwriting on it like most bootlegs. Just blank. The kind of blank that dares you to be curious. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands. No stickers, no logos, just faint scratches across the surface, like someone had handled it too much. Probably somebody's home videos, I muttered, but even saying it out loud didn't feel right. Something about it felt different. I asked the cashier if they knew where it came from. The old guy barely looked up from his newspaper. Stuff comes in boxes. We don't ask questions. $2 if you want it. I should have just set it back down, grabbed something familiar, and gone home. But $2 for a mystery? That's exactly the kind of gamble nostalgia junkies like me can't resist. I paid, stuffed the tape in my backpack, and left the store. Later that night, when I tried looking up the thrift shop's online inventory for fun, the website was gone. Just a broken link where the page used to be. I even tried checking the seller's info on my receipt. No results. It was like the shop itself had vanished overnight. Creepy, right? But at the time, I laughed it off. Coincidences happen. I had no idea that little black tape was going to change everything. Because when I got home and emptied my bag, it was the first thing I reached for. That's when I noticed one tape without a label. When I pulled the tape back out of my bag, it looked even stranger than I remembered. At first glance, it was just a plain black VHS, the kind they used for home recordings. No stickers, no logos, nothing to tell you what was inside. But when I tilted it under the lamp on my desk, I noticed something. The plastic was scratched in odd patterns, almost like someone had dragged their nails across it again and again. Not random scuffs from use. These were deliberate, like someone had tried to carve something but stopped halfway. I turned it over, studying the spools inside. The tape itself looked darker than it should have, like the magnetic strip had absorbed something over the years. Dust clung to the edges, but underneath there was this faint smell I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the musty scent of attic storage. No, this was sharper, briny, almost like seawater mixed with mildew. I leaned in and instantly regretted it, because I swear the scent made my stomach churn. I set it down, rubbing my hands on my jeans like I'd touched something unclean. Still, I couldn't take my eyes off it. There's something about the unknown that pulls at you. Part of me wanted to snap it in half, just to get rid of that creeping unease. But another part whispered, what if it's something rare? What if it's a lost episode nobody else has? Later that night, I even messaged a couple of friends online. Just a dumb group chat where we shared weird finds. I snapped a picture of the tape, captioned, "Thrift store horror movie? Place your bets." One buddy replied with a skull emoji. Another joked, "Congrats, you just bought the ring." Someone else said, "Cursed SpongeBob tape incoming." I laughed at the time, but rereading those messages now makes me feel sick. Like they knew more than they were letting on. Or maybe I just want to believe that, because the alternative is worse, that I walked into this blind, alone, and no one could have warned me. I put the tape on my shelf, intending to forget about it. But all night, while I tried distracting myself with TV or scrolling through my phone, I kept glancing back at it. Sitting there, motionless, but somehow present, like it wanted me to notice it. At one point, I even got up and turned it over again. That's when I saw it. Near the bottom edge of the casing, scratched so faintly into the plastic that I had to angle it under the light to see. For letters, D-O-N-T. Nothing else. Just that single word. I almost didn't put it in my VCR. Almost. But curiosity, or stupidity, won out. I slid the tape into the machine. The player groaned like it hadn't been used in years, gears clicking, tape spooling into place. My finger hovered over the play button longer than I cared to admit. My chest felt tight. My palms were damp. Then I pressed play. The screen flickered, and for a second I thought the tape was blank. Just static, gray and hissing. Then, faintly, like it was struggling to exist, the Nickelodeon Splat logo appeared. No sound, just the blurry orange blob dripping onto the screen. It dissolved slower than usual, dragging itself down in uneven frames, like the tape was fighting me already. And then the SpongeBob theme started, or something close to it. The familiar "Are you ready, kids?" rang out, but it was wrong. The voice sounded muffled, like it was being shouted from the bottom of a well. I almost laughed, thinking maybe it was some bootleg recording, but then the children's voices came in with their usual, "Aye, aye, Captain." Except there was only one voice. Just one child, flat and monotone, answering too late. The music itself felt off-pitch, like the instruments had been tuned a half-step lower. The melody dragged, sluggish and warped, like it had been recorded on dying speakers. And when the singer finally belted "OHHHH," who lives in a pineapple under the sea, His voice cracked, twisting into static halfway through the line. I should have stopped it then. I should have ejected the tape and tossed it into the trash. But I told myself it was just an old copy, maybe damaged, maybe re-recorded. And then the intro visuals started rolling, and I couldn't look away. At first, it was normal, SpongeBob leaping out of his pineapple house, jellyfish floating across the screen. But the colors were wrong. Washed out. Faded, like the sun had been drained from the entire ocean. His pineapple wasn't bright orange, but this dull, bruised shade. The water wasn't cheerful blue. It was a murky green, cloudy and oppressive, like an algae bloom had swallowed the whole sea. And SpongeBob himself. God. His movements were jerky, inconsistent, like frames were missing. He waved at the camera, but his hand twitched mid-motion, freezing for a second before continuing. His laugh, normally that grating, bubbly sound everyone knows, came out as something deeper, stretched and distorted, like a voice slowed down on a recorder. It echoed far too long after it ended, overlapping with itself until it didn't sound like laughing at all. The sequence kept going, but things started unraveling the longer I watched. Jellyfish zipped by, only they weren't pink. They were a pale, fleshy color, with black centers that pulsed like pupils. The bubbles rising across the screen didn't pop. They just melted into static as they floated upward. I leaned forward, trying to convince myself it was just bad quality, some fan edit gone wrong. Maybe this is a parody, I muttered. But then the background behind SpongeBob began to change. When he skipped past Squidward's house, I noticed the windows were shattered. Not cracked, shattered. Jagged edges pointed inward, and the inside was pitch black, like the house had been hollowed out. No Squidward in sight. By the time SpongeBob hopped onto the stage with his guitar, the set was almost unrecognizable. The sand was littered with dark stains that spread outward like ink. The sky above wasn't blue. It was gray, heavy, and trembling with faint lines, like an old film reel burning. Then came the moment that made my skin crawl. Instead of ending the theme with SpongeBob's goofy grin and title card, the camera zoomed in on his face. Too close. His teeth took up half the frame, uneven and sharp, some longer than others. His eyes weren't the round, bright ones I remembered. They were human, small, bloodshot, darting left and right like he was aware of me. The theme sputtered out. The music cut short, and for 3 solid seconds the screen was silent except for the faint hum of static. SpongeBob just stared. No smile, no laugh, just breathing, wet, raspy, audible breathing. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Some creepy fan had overdubbed the intro to freak people out. But then the screen shifted, and that's when the episode began. The episode began with no title card, just a shot of SpongeBob sitting in his living room. At first, nothing about it seemed outright terrifying, only wrong. He wasn't bouncing with energy. He wasn't humming or fiddling with jellyfishing nets. He was just sitting there, completely still, on the edge of his armchair. No sound, no dialogue, just that low, underwater hum that plays when there's supposed to be background noise. Only this hum was deeper, heavier, almost like a groan. It reverberated through my speakers, sinking into my chest until I realized I was holding my breath without meaning to. SpongeBob's eyes didn't blink. They stayed wide, too wide, staring at something off-screen. His body was unnaturally stiff, frozen in a half-slouch, but every few seconds he would twitch. Just once, like a single frame skipped. His head jolted to the side, or his arms spasmed, before locking back into place. At first, I thought it was just old tape damage. You expect skips and fuzz with VHS. But then the screen broke into static for a fraction of a second, and when it cleared, something new was there. Not part of the cartoon. For less than a heartbeat, I saw what looked like a grainy photo of a child underwater, eyes wide, bubbles escaping their mouth. And then it snapped back to SpongeBob on his chair, frozen like nothing happened. I actually laughed nervously. Weird splice, I said out loud, trying to convince myself. But when it happened again, different static, different flash, I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. This time it wasn't a cartoon frame at all. It was footage, real footage, of something pale drifting downward through murky water. The angle was tilted, the image almost blurred, but it looked like a small hand. And then, back to SpongeBob. I rewound 3 times because I couldn't believe what I saw. Each time, the static flickered in the exact same spot, and each time, the same drowning image appeared. It wasn't my imagination. By the fourth glitch, I stopped trying to convince myself it was an error. Because what replaced the static wasn't just random footage anymore. It was text. White block letters, jagged, shaky. Keep watching. SpongeBob finally moved. Slowly, like he was underwater for real, his head turned toward the camera. His pupils narrowed, then stretched, then went wide again in cycles that didn't match anything human or cartoon. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just stared at me, silent, like he was waiting for me to do something. The groaning sound grew louder, vibrating the speakers. It didn't even sound like background ambience anymore. It sounded alive, like dozens of voices layered beneath the ocean noise, trying to form words, but never quite breaking through. Another glitch. This one sharper. For less than a second, I saw an unrendered animation frame. SpongeBob's body with no textures, just wireframe outlines. His mouth open, frozen mid-scream, his body warped into impossible angles. Then it was gone. I leaned so close to the screen I could see the pixels, searching for details. My heart was hammering. The rational part of my brain kept whispering, "It's just a tape. It's just a tape." But every instinct told me I was looking at something I was never meant to see. The scene dragged on. SpongeBob sitting, breathing, if you could call it that. Eyes staring just slightly off-center from mine. And then came the worst static yet. For half a second, the screen filled with overlapping images. Children pressed against glass, mouths open in silent screams. Bikini Bottom in ruins, buildings crumbling, sand stained black. Text flashing too fast to fully read. Fragments like, "Don't turn off," and "ITS not over." When the picture stabilized, SpongeBob was still sitting there. Only now his mouth was moving. Slowly, shaping words without sound. I leaned forward, trying to read his lips. And I swear, clear as day, he mouthed, "I see you." That's when I realized I was gripping the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles had gone white. My throat was dry, my whole body tight. Something about that silent phrase cut deeper than any scream. I grabbed the remote and hit pause, desperate for relief. But pausing didn't help. The pause button froze nothing. The screen stuttered, lines crawling across SpongeBob's unmoving body, but his eyes still shifted, fraction by fraction, until they locked with mine again. My stomach dropped. It wasn't playback anymore. It was presence. I hit stop. The VCR word clunked, then spat static instead of ejecting the tape. I pressed stop again, harder, jabbing my thumb until it hurt. Nothing. The tape wouldn't release. On screen, SpongeBob leaned forward, just slightly. His face filled more of the frame, as though he was pushing against the glass. His lips moved again, slower this time, exaggerated so I couldn't mistake it. "I see you." I felt heat crawl up my neck. It wasn't just a cartoon. It wasn't even just a cursed tape. The damn thing was aware. The tape wasn't just showing me something. I whispered. It was watching me back. That's when the VCR made a high-pitched whine, the kind it makes when the tape is rewinding. But the counter on the display wasn't moving. It was stuck at midnight. The machine was straining, like it was chewing on the tape, but refusing to spit it out. On screen, SpongeBob blinked. The sound made me jump. It wasn't a normal cartoon blink. The quick, cheery pop. It was wet, organic, like someone pressing their hand into a sponge full of water. "Can you hear me?" The voice was faint, buried under the static. My skin prickled all over. I turned the volume down to 0, but the voice kept bleeding through, so soft I almost doubted it, until SpongeBob's mouth moved in perfect sync with the whisper. "Don't stop. Keep watching." I pushed power on the TV. The screen flickered black for one breath before snapping back on by itself, louder than before, the groaning underwater chorus vibrating through my floorboards. The VCR wasn't just running, it was in control. And SpongeBob, he wasn't sitting anymore. He was standing, right in the middle of his living room, staring directly into the lens. The camera angle was wrong. Too centered, too level. Like someone, or something, had set it up exactly where a human's eyes would be if they were in that room. I leaned back in my chair, pulse hammering in my throat. He tilted his head, mimicking me, like a reflection with a half-second delay. Then, a frame stutter. For less than a blink, I saw my own room, my desk, my VCR, even my hands frozen on the remote, before it snapped back to the cartoon. My breath hitched. It wasn't showing Bikini Bottom anymore. It was showing me. The whisper grew louder. Clearer. My speakers weren't even plugged in, yet I could hear it breathing behind me. Don't stop now. We're almost there. I spun around, nothing but the hum of my dark room. But when I turned back, SpongeBob had moved closer to the screen. His whole face filled it now, pupils stretched into dark ovals, pulsing slightly like living things. His lips peeled back in the slowest grin I'd ever seen, teeth too flat, too human. I slammed the power button on the VCR. The machine groaned, metal grinding like it was breaking itself apart, but the picture stayed. The counter on the display finally moved, but backward. Negative numbers rolling fast. 00:01:12, 00:05:47, 00:15:03. Rewinding to a place I didn't know existed. And SpongeBob whispered one more phrase before the static swallowed the frame. Now it's your turn. I froze. My hand hovered over the power strip, every instinct screaming to rip it from the wall, to end it before whatever was coming next. But another part of me, darker, desperate, needed to know. Because the tape wasn't just asking me to watch. It was daring me to. I don't know how much time had passed before the screen steadied again. My counter still ticked backward, the numbers rolling into nonsense. But the picture came into focus, Bikini Bottom. Or at least, what was left of it. The familiar pastel colors were gone. Everything looked washed out, as if the ocean had drained of life. The sky wasn't blue anymore. It was the sickly gray of old dishwater, thick and stagnant. The houses tilted at odd angles, foundations cracked, and the sand was littered with unrecognizable shapes that only vaguely resembled sea life. And there was SpongeBob, walking, not bouncing, not skipping, not humming, just dragging his square little body across the sand in slow, mechanical steps. His shoes scraped like nails on glass. Every few seconds, he twitched, like his body wasn't entirely under his own control. I leaned closer, stomach tight. That was when I noticed his face. His eyes, usually wide with manic cheer, were half-lidded and dull. But worse than that, his mouth hung open in a way that wasn't goofy or cartoonish. It was slack, lifeless, like someone who had just given up. He passed by Squidward's house first. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the walls were smeared with something dark, swirling like ink and water. For a moment, I thought it was just poor animation, but then the frame stuttered, and I saw a shape among the stains, Squidward, or what was left of him. His clarinet lay snapped in two, shoved through the middle of his body like a stake. His eyes were gone, replaced by hollow sockets that seemed to throb with the faintest red glow. The episode didn't linger. It didn't give me time to process. SpongeBob kept walking. Patrick's Rock was next. At first it seemed empty, but then the angle changed, and I wished it had stayed hidden. Patrick was there, all right, flattened against the wall like a starfish pinned for display. His body looked stretched, grotesquely elongated, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. His eyes weren't even drawn. They were scribbled, rough black circles like something a child would doodle in haste. I wanted to look away, but my body wouldn't let me. Every step SpongeBob took pulled me deeper, like the tape knew exactly how long to hold my attention before dragging me to the next atrocity. Sandy's tree dome. Cracked. Flooded. Her suit floated in the water, helmet shattered, but the body inside the suit wasn't hers anymore. It looked wrong, too long in some places, missing in others. A distorted shadow of a squirrel. SpongeBob didn't react. He didn't speak. He just stared for a long, quiet moment, then turned his head toward the camera and smiled. It wasn't cheerful. It wasn't even sinister. It was worse. It was knowing. Like he understood what I'd just seen, and he was glad I couldn't escape it. The sound changed again. No more groaning, no more static hum. Now it was layered voices, low, high, distorted, all speaking at once. Some were laughing, some were crying, and some were screaming so faintly it barely registered, but it got under my skin like needles. The voices built into something unbearable as SpongeBob reached the Krusty Krab. The restaurant looked bombed out, boards splintered, the sign dangling from one rusted nail. Inside, I glimpsed shapes on the floor. A spatula, a hat, red splatters smeared across the grill that hissed and smoked even though no fire burned beneath it. I thought maybe Mr. Krabs would appear. Some twisted version of him, like the others. But there was no one. The shapes weren't characters. They weren't anything recognizable. They were just meat. The voices grew louder. SpongeBob stepped inside the Krusty Krab, stood in the middle of the carnage, and slowly tilted his head back. His mouth opened. At first, it was silent. Then came the scream. It wasn't SpongeBob's laugh pitched wrong, or a goofy squeal. It was layered, like the voices before, but sharper, more violent. Dozens of voices tearing out of one throat, distorted, cracking, some impossibly low, others shrieking so high I covered my ears, but it didn't matter. The sound bypassed everything, vibrating inside my skull. It went on, the picture shaking, the colors bleeding until the whole frame was a storm of static and screaming yellow. And then, black. Just black. No credits. No jingle. Nothing. For a long moment, I thought it was over. My chest rose and fell in ragged breaths, sweat stinging my eyes. My hand hovered over the power strip, ready to pull the plug once and for all. Then I heard it. A faint sound beneath the static. Not voices this time. Not groaning. Not even the scream. It was laughter. But not SpongeBob's laugh. Not the manic, high-pitched cackle that had been branded into every kid's memory. This was lower. Warped. Like it had been dragged through 100 layers of distortion until it was almost unrecognizable. Almost. It built in the silence, a distant ripple under the static, as though the tape itself was laughing at me for watching. And that's when it hit me. The real horror wasn't in the episode itself. It was in the fact that I had watched all of it. That I couldn't unsee it. That whatever had been recorded on that tape wasn't done with me yet. I thought it was over. But I was wrong. When the screen finally went black for good, I sat frozen in front of it, the static still whispering faint laughter through my speakers. My hand trembled as I reached for the eject button. This time, the machine obeyed. The tape slid out slowly, reluctantly, like it didn't want to leave the VCR. I picked it up, and that's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. It was warm, not just from the machine's heat. Too warm, like it had been alive, like blood pulsing faintly beneath its plastic shell. My palm prickled, and I swear I felt a faint vibration inside, as though something trapped in the reels was still moving. I dropped it on my desk, the clatter too loud in the dead quiet of my room. For a second, I swore I heard it splash instead of thud. I leaned closer, my heart hammering, and there it was, the faintest drip of water leaking from the bottom corner of the VHS. Salt water, briny and sharp, staining the wood before vanishing as if the desk itself had absorbed it. I told myself I was imagining things. Exhaustion, too much staring at screens, too much nostalgia gone wrong. But that night, when I finally crawled into bed, I dreamt I was underwater. Not swimming, not floating, drowning. My arms heavy, lungs burning, salt tearing into my throat as faceless silhouettes circled in the dark around me. Their mouths opened wide, bubbles rising, and instead of voices, I heard SpongeBob's warped scream reverberating through the current. I woke up gasping, my sheets damp with sweat. At least, I told myself it was sweat. The next night, it wasn't a dream that woke me. It was the sound of my TV turning on. I sat bolt upright, my room washed in flickering light. My VCR wasn't even plugged in anymore. I'd yanked the cord from the wall before I'd gone to bed. But there it was, the glow of static spilling across my floor. I crept forward, pulse thudding so loud it drowned out the faint hiss of the screen. My reflection stared back at me in the static, jittering like bad reception. And just before I hit the power button, the snow twisted into something else. A yellow blur. A face I knew too well. I pulled the plug from the outlet again, harder this time. The screen went black, but I could still hear faint water dripping from somewhere in the room. I wasn't the only one who'd seen it. A couple of days before, when I was still convincing myself the whole thing was just an edgy lost media joke, I'd shown a short clip from the tape to a friend. Just 30 seconds, nothing too bad. SpongeBob's distorted laugh, the colors bleeding at the edges, Squidward's hollow sockets. I'd laughed it off as creepypasta in VHS form. They hadn't laughed. They'd just stared at the screen, their face pale, their lip twitching like they were about to say something. But they didn't. They just asked me, flatly, to turn it off. I did. We didn't talk much after that. Now my texts sit unread. My calls go straight to voicemail. Their social media hasn't updated in days. At first, I thought maybe they were avoiding me, freaked out by how much I obsessed over the tape. But last night, while scrolling through old messages, I noticed something chilling. The last thing they ever sent me was a video. 10 seconds long. No caption. I pressed play. Static. Faint at first, then louder, crackling like a storm inside my phone. The image shifted, blurred, and then stabilized. It was my room, my desk, my VCR, the tape still sitting on top. And just before the video cut to black, a distorted laugh spilled through my speaker, the same one I'd heard echoing under the static. That's when I realized the tape was never meant to be seen. Not by me, not by my friend, not by anyone, but it had chosen us anyway. And if it could bleed from the real into reality once, what was stopping it from doing it again? I thought watching was the end, but it was only the beginning. I couldn't just sit there, waiting for the tape to turn my life inside out. I needed answers. Something, anything, that would explain how a children's cartoon could twist into this. So I did what anyone would do. I went online. I started small. Message boards, nostalgia threads, old Nickelodeon fan pages. Most posts about SpongeBob's early seasons were harmless, full of people debating their favorite jokes or posting screenshots. But buried deeper, past the cheery trivia and fan art, I found whispers. Phrases like the unaired reels or pilot fragments. One thread from 2008 caught my eye. The user claimed to have interned at Nickelodeon's animation studio in Burbank. Their post was riddled with typos, rushed like they'd written it in one sitting, late at night. They mentioned an animator, last name Keller, who worked on the first season. Supposedly brilliant, supposedly unstable. The intern said Keller had an obsession with pushing the limits of children's TV. He wanted to see how much darkness you could sneak in before anyone noticed. Then, one day, he vanished. No resignation, no forwarding address. Just gone. The official record said personal leave. But according to the intern, Keller had been working on something before he disappeared. A reel that no one at the studio was supposed to talk about. I dug deeper. Obscure blogs, archived PDFs, half-broken links that led to cached versions of old fan sites. Again and again, Keller's name popped up in hushed tones. Some claimed he'd tried to make a pilot episode too disturbing for kids. Others swore he'd stolen footage from experimental horror films and spliced it into SpongeBob frames. A few insisted the man had never existed at all, just a fabrication created by fans to explain a handful of cursed images. But then I found something I wasn't supposed to. A zipped folder buried on a deep web forum, flagged 100 times over. The title, Nick_Real_0. Inside, grainy scans of production memos. Handwritten notes in the margins. Sketches of SpongeBob, not cheerful but hollow-eyed, lips peeled back in grimaces. A storyboard that matched almost frame for frame what I had seen on my tape. The slow walk through Bikini Bottom, the distorted laugh. And on one of the memos, Keller's name, underlined twice. Beside it, a phrase that made my skin crawl. If they air this, no one will sleep again. I showed the scans to a contact I knew through horror forums, someone who liked to call himself Vachus_archivist. He'd been around long enough to know the difference between fakes and genuine leaks. I asked him straight out, "Have you seen anything like this before?" He didn't reply right away. When he finally did, the message was short. "Archivist, where did you get this?" "Me, doesn't matter. I just need to know if it's real." "Archivist, too real. Delete it. Delete everything." "Me, why? Who was Keller?" "Archivist, stop digging. They don't like it when you dig." "They?" I pressed him to explain. No answer. When I refreshed the page, his account was gone. Deleted. Like he'd never been there. My screen reflected my pale face as I stared into the empty chat box. The deeper I went, the less it felt like research and the more it felt like trespassing. Like I was kicking up dust in a room where something had been sealed away on purpose. And yet, I couldn't stop. Every thread, every memo, every whispered rumor all pointed to one truth I didn't want to believe but couldn't ignore. The tape in my possession wasn't an accident. It was a piece of Keller's reel. And somehow, it had found me. I should have stopped after the warning. I should have shut my laptop, shoved the tape into the deepest drawer I could find, and never spoken of it again. But curiosity is its own kind of curse, and by then, it had me by the throat. The deeper I dug, the darker the trail became. Scattered across old forums and forgotten blogs were fragments of the same rumor, repeating like a broken record. The lost reel wasn't just a failed pilot. It was part of something bigger. One story claimed Nickelodeon executives had secretly funded a psychological experiment in the late 90s, testing how far disturbing imagery could be smuggled into children's programming without parents noticing. A stress test for young minds. They said Keller had been the one chosen to design it, and that he'd taken the assignment far too seriously. Another account, from an anonymous post that read like a confession, painted a more supernatural picture. It described Keller as unstable, unraveling during production, his mental health corroding under the pressure of deadlines. Instead of taking time off, he locked himself inside his office for days at a time. When he finally emerged, he handed over a reel of footage that no one remembered animating. Entire sequences seemed to appear out of nowhere, frames drawn in a style that didn't match the show, images of things no storyboard had ever called for. The staff who viewed it in the screening room walked out pale, shaken, some crying openly. According to the post, Keller disappeared not long after that, and so did the reel. But the most chilling piece of lore came from a scan I almost missed. An internal memo, dated 1999, stamped in red, "Do not duplicate." It referenced something called Episode 0 and a set of instructions for storage. The last line wasn't professional at all. It was scrawled in ink, jagged and frantic. "Never finished the episode." I stared at the words, my throat dry. The implication clawed at the back of my mind. Never finished the episode. But hadn't I already watched it through? That was the worst part. Because if the memo was right, what I'd seen, the gray Bikini Bottom, the mutilated characters, SpongeBob's scream, it hadn't been the true ending. The tape I had wasn't complete. And that's when I realized I hadn't actually seen the real ending yet. Every explanation I uncovered only made things worse. Was it an experiment? A curse? A breakdown caught on film? None of it fit neatly, and the contradictions only deepened the dread. If Keller had spliced in footage that came from nowhere, who, or what, had drawn it? And if the episode had an unfinished ending, where was the rest of it? I shut my laptop, my reflection faint in the black screen. I looked exhausted, hollow-eyed, like one of Keller's sketches. The tape sat on my desk, still faintly warped at the edges from heat, like it had its own fever. I couldn't stop glancing at it, as if it was daring me to slide it back into the VCR. Part of me wanted to, needed to, but another part, the rational sliver of my brain still holding on, whispered that maybe this was the moment to end it. Smash the tape, burn it, destroy it before it could finish what it started. I sat there for hours, torn between terror and obsession, staring at the black plastic shell as though it might blink. Because I knew the truth now. The tape wasn't just cursed. It was unfinished, and it wasn't done with me yet. I tried destroying it. God knows I tried. First, I took a hammer to the tape, splintering the plastic shell until the reels burst out in a tangle of glossy black ribbon. I swept the pieces into a trash bag, knotted it shut, and dropped it into a dumpster halfway across town. I walked home lighter, freer, like I'd finally broken the spell. The next morning, it was back on my desk, perfectly intact. I told myself I must have been half asleep, that I hadn't really thrown it out, that my memory was playing tricks on me. So I went further. I soaked it in lighter fluid, set it on fire in an alley, and watched the black smoke twist into the sky. My eyes burned, my lungs stung, and when nothing but melted plastic remained, I kicked the ashes into the gutter. That night, I woke to the smell of seawater. And there it was again, sitting upright on my desk, not a single mark on it. By the third attempt, I stopped pretending. I knew the truth. The tape didn't belong to me. I belonged to it. So here I am, recording this. My final confession. My proof. If anyone finds this file, you'll know what happened. You'll know I didn't imagine it. The tape hums even now, vibrating faintly, like it's eager. Like it knows I'm talking about it. Sometimes I swear I hear the faint whir of the reels turning even when it's not in the VCR, as if it's playing itself over and over in the dark. And the laugh. God, the laugh. It started as whispers in the static, easy to dismiss. But last night, I heard it outside my window. That same warped chuckle, rising and falling in a rhythm I've known since childhood, twisted into something guttural, wrong. I pulled the curtains shut. I don't dare open them again. Every day since, the line between the tape and my world has thinned. My phone glitches with bursts of static. The sound of dripping water follows me into every room. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see yellow, grainy, shifting, waiting. And yet, I can't bring myself to let go. Maybe Keller didn't finish the episode because it wasn't meant to end. Maybe the ending only happens when someone like me watches it through to the last frame. I don't know if I'll be the one to do it. I don't even know if I'll have a choice. But if you're hearing this, if you've stayed with me this far, consider this your warning. Don't look for the tape. Don't go digging through thrift stores or eBay lots. And if it ever finds you, because it will, eventually, don't watch it. And if you already have, don't look behind you.